have to really escalate the noise we make so that we'll be heard.
Welcome to Gay USA. I'm Andy Humm.
I'm the returning Ann Northrop.
Welcome back, Ann.
Out of my sick bed. Thank you, Corey Johnson, for filling in for me. You did a great job. I thought the show last week was terrific.
Thanks very much, and thank you to Corey again.
Yeah.
And we're going to start off with anti-gay bills in Texas and Louisiana that were killed, but are not really dead yet.
No, in fact, Louisiana Governor Bobby Jindal is already doing what he can to, make up for the fact that his favorite bill was killed.
21-year-old London Chanel was murdered in Philadelphia. This is the 8th transgender woman of color killed in the United States this year.
That we know of. And a very important gay pioneer, William Kelly from Chicago, a leader, an activist, a lawyer there since the mid-'60s, has died at 72.
Laramie, Wyoming, where Matthew Shepard was murdered in 1998, is the first city in that state to adopt LGBT rights protections.
Very nice. And a Catholic campus minister has been fired by his university for standing up for gay rights.
The United States has condemned the threats by the president of the Gambia to kill gay people.
We are on pins and needles here as we tape on Wednesday afternoon, anticipating Friday's vote in the Republic of Ireland on same-sex marriage.
I'm wearing a green tie for luck. Michael Johnson in Missouri was convicted of having sex without disclosing his HIV status and faces up to 65 years in prison.
Cate Blanchett is in Cannes promoting her new lesbian-themed movie, but she has clarified her quoted statements on previous relationships with women.
And I will review a play with British actor Simon Callow as a transgender woman. Tuesdays at Tesco's, it's called, at Brits Off Broadway in New York.
And I will gush some more about Fun Home on Broadway.
Oh, good.
But let's start with this political news around the nation.
In Texas, where no man, woman, child, or dog is safe while the legislature is in session. I had to say that. Molly Ivins used to say that all the time.
Yes. She wrote very amusingly about the Texas legislature. Nonetheless, things must be different because they killed the bill that would have made them try to commit civil disobedience against any national ruling for same-sex marriage.
Yeah, I mean, our side used delaying tactics to just run out the clock on the legislative session. But these are bills that had 90 sponsors out of 150 members, and they're looking now for a way to tack on the spirit of the bill or the words of the bill to some other bill later in the session.
Yeah,
as an amendment.
There's another one, too, about allowing adoption agencies to reject LGBT parents on religious grounds. That was sent back to committee. But as we said in the headlines, these dogs have not been killed yet. They could still come up in various forms. The session is not over, and people will be scrambling to get them passed.
I will admit I was somewhat surprised at how well we did in Louisiana, where the Marriage and Conscience Act went down 10-2 in committee, which was a victory for the Forum for Equality, Louisiana down there.
Now, Governor Jindal kept claiming, oh, this is not against gay people. This is just about people being allowed to assert their religious objections to same-sex marriage. I don't know who he thinks gets same-sex married, if not gay people, but we could ask him about that. But it's another one of these right to discriminate on religious grounds bills.
As in Indiana, where we beat it back to great fanfare, but a lot of these others have come up, and the same kind of force has not been brought to bear.
Well, in Louisiana, it was slow to materialize, but businesses did end up standing up against this bill, and I think that did have a major role in killing it. But unlike Governor Pence in Indiana, Governor Jindal in Louisiana still has unrealistic presidential ambitions.
And he is unrepentant.
No, so he's sticking to his guns. So he immediately, the minute this bill is killed, he immediately issues an executive order, in spite of all his complaints about Obama's executive orders, saying that the state may not penalize a business for or business owner who refuses service or whatever on the grounds of their personal religious objections to same-sex marriage.
So that's not the entirety of the bill that was up, but it's bad.
Yeah, it only says the government can't do it. It doesn't exempt businesses themselves from just between them and their customers from that kind of action. It just says the government can't punish them. So the fight is still being fought in Louisiana and in Texas, but no one thinks that Bobby Jindal is covering himself with any glory by doing this.
Well, let's talk about some of the other developments in state houses, because they're all going through their legislative sessions and finishing them up. In Nebraska, they tabled a workplace protections bill.
Yeah. By the way, our Assembly member, Danny O'Donnell, here in New York, is asking New York State to institute a boycott of Louisiana, given that all these states jumped on the bandwagon against against Louisiana. They threatened to do that in Indiana before that one was supposedly fixed. So now he's saying, well, come on, let's do it to Louisiana.
Is there any place we can go? Are there any products we can buy?
In Georgia, the Republican Party there has elected a gay man as the party treasurer, while at the same time endorsing one of these religious freedom to discriminate bills.
Terrible. How did he or she vote?
I don't know how he voted, but I can tell you that the Republican National Committee has passed a resolution that endorses religious freedom bills nationally.
Right. In Nevada, the Assembly there passed an anti-bullying bill inclusive of LGBT folks, and it goes to represent the Republican governor, Sandoval, who sponsored it. So I would expect him to sign it.
I would expect so, and also good news in Connecticut, where the House there has okayed a bill to allow transgender people to change their gender marker on their birth certificates without necessarily having to have surgery, so that's good.
You know, in Wyoming, after the Matthew Shepard murder, anti-gay murder, which generated such worldwide publicity, there was a big push for legislation in Wyoming and things didn't get very far for a long time. Although they did block putting on the ballot an anti-gay marriage amendment. They stopped that, which was nice. But finally, Laramie, the city where it all happened, the city council there voted 7-2 in favor of a law banning discrimination on the basis of sexual orientation and gender identity in housing, employment, and public accommodations. And this is the first in Wyoming.
And only 17 years after Matthew Shepard's murder. The subject of banning conversion therapy has been hot this week. First of all, the Illinois House of Representatives passed a no conversion therapy for minors bill.
68-43.
That now goes to the Senate. In Oregon,
they've got a Republican governor who has also said he will sign it.
Yes. And the governor of Oregon, who is a bisexual woman,
Cate Brown
signed their no conversion therapy for minors bill, which had been passed by the legislature.
So somebody got the idea, let's do this on the federal level. It's Representative Ted Lieu of California, and he's introduced a federal bill to ban conversion therapy for minors.
No, for everybody.
For everyone? I'm sorry. I learn things by watching this show.
Pay attention. It's the Therapeutic Fraud Prevention Act. It says no conversion therapy for pay, by professionals. Religious quacks
like
can still do it, yes. But he's defining it as fraud. So he is,
as has happened in the New Jersey case.
yes.
Looking at this,
and Ted Lieu is the guy who promoted the California bill. He is a representative from California, so now he's trying to take it national. But he said, look, if it's fraud for minors, it's fraud for everybody, and we are going to try to label it that and outlaw it.
we shouldn't allow it between consenting adults.
Religious ones, yes. And Representative Jackie Spire, also a Democrat from California, has asked the Federal Trade Commission to institute an investigation of the therapists, so-called, who are practicing this conversion therapy.
Now, we certainly are. There's a big nationwide movement. The National Center for Lesbian Rights is very involved in making this a big national movement. But it is a relatively small phenomenon at this point, is it not? In terms of the people who try to pull this off.
We
and
don't
do
know.
This,
we don't know.
You know.
Isn't one too many, Andy?
Yes. No, I'm just saying. And the people and the associations have long condemned this practice. The professional associations. So most of it is just practiced by religious quacks. Trading on people's credulity.
Well, they may be religious quacks, but a lot of them have credentials as therapists.
Well, I just don't want them reimbursed for it.
Michelle Bachmann's husband.
I don't want them reimbursed for this. But we complain about all this. We complain about all this religious-based bigotry and everything else. But we act so high and mighty. But right here in New York City, and I've talked about it on the show for the last couple of weeks, our city council, including 4 city council members who are gay, are trying to push a bill that would give free security officers to every religious school in the city. And despite the fact that these are anti-gay institutions. And I want to see a bill that says no money, no tax money can be spent on an institution that is anti-gay. You wouldn't do it for the Boy Scouts. You shouldn't be doing it for these church-run schools.
Amen.
All right. I just don't want us thinking that we're so far ahead of everybody.
No.
We're not.
Let's get into some serious stories about violence. And the primary one this week comes to us from Philadelphia, where a young transgender woman, London Chanel, 21 years old, stabbed to death in an empty, abandoned home in the midst of an argument.
North Philadelphia.
They have arrested an alleged perpetrator. It is an endless stream. There's a picture of her.
Yeah, she had just gone to court, by the way, to have her name changed legally.
Tons of support from her friends and community.
Candlelight vigil set for Friday there. As we're sitting here on Wednesday, there's going to be one in New York right today and Wednesday in New York and Union Square.
Yeah, very, very popular in her community, and this is another tragic case in a long line of them.
Right.
This is a continuing story, and nothing is being done to stop this.
We told you about that much more complicated case in New York City, right here in Chelsea, where we live, at a BBQ restaurant.
Dallas BBQ.
Okay, where there was a fight that broke out over anti-gay words that were said. Who threw the first punch? We don't know. There's an allegation that the gay guy who was insulted threw a punch. And then the suspect, and we have his picture, this guy, we have him on video picking up a heavy wooden chair and breaking it over trying to break it over their heads. They were seriously injured. They ended up not going to the hospital because they couldn't
afford it.
Couldn't afford the ambulance. Seriously. Anyway, this suspect has been identified by the police as Beina El Amin, 41 years old. He's been arrested 18 times for various things, from assault to forgery, in multiple states, and he is suspected of fleeing the state of New York. Now, again, this case, there's been no, indictments or anything like this in this case. It hasn't all been sorted out yet about who was at fault. And my question has always been, if you get into a fight with somebody and somebody then uses what is potentially lethal violence against you, are they more culpable? But I don't know.
And I think the law will also say that whoever did throw the first punch bears a great deal of responsibility, as opposed to having walked away. But
and we urge you, when you were insulted, maybe exchange words, but don't hit people.
No, please don't, because...
Well, we don't know what happened. We have
We
testimony of one person.
We don't.
That the gay guy threw the first punch.
Yeah. And of course, there's a lot of publicity about this Amtrak train engineer, Brandon Bastian, who, 32 years old, running the train that crashed outside Philadelphia. And it turns out that he's gay.
But a gay activist.
Yeah, fought Prop 8 in California. And so you have that moment of, is this good for the Jews, bad for the Jews?
Well, I was going to say, the right-wing commentators who have brought this up as this is the key to the crash was that a homosexual was driving the train.
A homosexual activist.
Yes. It, to me, is like saying the Jews killed Christ.
Yeah.
That's the spirit of that kind of a comment, and it has no place.
None, and they are taking it as an opportunity to condemn us and fight against our issues.
Well, not everybody's condemning us. In Illinois, in Elwood, at the Abraham Lincoln National Cemetery, we now have the first federally approved monument honoring LGBT veterans on this Veterans Day weekend.
Yeah, created by the Chicago chapter of American Veterans for Equal Rights. Back to some disturbing news. Marshall University has dismissed a running back from its team, Stuart Butler. Mm-hmm. He is charged in the beating of 2 gay men. He's arraigned before a magistrate in West Virginia, where Marshall is, on misdemeanor battery counts, released on bail. The criminal complaint said that after seeing the men kissing on a street, he punched them.
And then tried to act like they came after me or something like that, but there was video of it.
Yeah.
So that disproved that.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, and then there's a follow-up on the murder of Mark Carson in New York, 32. He was murdered in an anti-gay assault in 2013. The defendant, Elliot Morales, made incriminating statements, but they may be thrown out due to the failure to read him his Miranda rights. He's charged with second-degree murder as a hate crime. Of course, he's been representing himself in court, and so he has, as they say, a fool for a lawyer.
We've been following the strange case of the basketball players Brittany Griner and Glory Johnson, first fiancés, arrested in a domestic violence dispute, then married a few days later. And now the WNBA, the Women's National Basketball Association, has suspended them for each. They play for different teams, and they've been suspended each for the first 7 games of the season.
The longest suspension in the history of the league.
Well, it's about a quarter of the season. 20% of the season.
No, that's...
Which is significant. It's more than, well, let's see, Tom Brady, 4 games. No, he's 25% of the season, but he's appealing his suspension. And then there was a strange story in the New York Times this weekend covering their wedding, but it's a whole long profile in which Glory Johnson says, I was never interested in women. I'm not a lesbian. That's not my inclination. But Brittany just, she was different, and she kept pursuing me, and so now I like her. It's very strange.
Here's some slightly encouraging news about bullying. There was a survey from the National Center for Education Statistics that found that 22% of 12 to 18-year-olds have been bullied in school, but that is down 6% from the year before. So maybe we're making progress with all these anti-bullying programs.
Let's take a moment to remember and celebrate Bill Kelly.
Oh, yes.
72 years old, which to me is quite young.
We have a picture of him with his surviving partner, Chen Ui.
Oi, I would say.
Okay. O-O-I. They've been together since 1979.
And Bill was a legendary activist in Chicago. He was involved in every single organization, starting with the Mattachine Society in the 60s.
50 years, really, an activist. Yeah. And that takes him well before Stonewall. That was Mattachine Midwest. He helped organize the first National Gay and Lesbian Conference in 1950. 66. Remember, Stonewall wasn't until 1969.
And our next picture shows him in the 60s in Philadelphia, demonstrating in those first famous early demonstrations there that are going to be celebrated with a 50th anniversary event this summer.
They called it the Philadelphia Reminder.
That's Kayla Housen on the right, who was Barbara Giddings' partner. Bill is in the middle there.
And Frank Kameny was there, and they made everybody get up in jackets and ties, and women had to wear dresses and all that kind of stuff.
And then he was part of the big famous meeting at the White House called by Midge Costanza, who was an aide to Jimmy Carter. And
we have that next picture.
Closeted lesbian.
Yes, at the time.
Yes.
Jimmy Carter didn't pop into the meeting.
No, he
but
did
it was
not.
It was a big breakthrough that we were allowed inside the White House.
Inside the building.
My goodness.
Yeah, so we're hoping they will pull up that picture of the meeting at the White House. So Bill Kelly was there as the Chicago activist, and because he was friendly with leaders of the National Gay Task Force, as it was called at the time, which managed to negotiate the meeting with Midge Costanza. I guess we're not going to get that picture
of the meeting at the White House. Maybe not.
Okay.
But he was also, obviously, a lot of his activism was centered on Chicago, and he co-founded the Chicago Gay Crusader newspaper. He chaired the Cook County Commission on Human Relations for its first 10 years. He co-chaired the Illinois Gays for Legislative Action, and later the Illinois Gay Rights Task Force in the 70s. And so, you know.
And he was active up to the moment of his death, which was an unexpected death, although he'd had heart disease for a while, I guess. He was active on an internet chat list that we're on, and he had just written the night before a note about the article in the New York Times about the sort of sex panic in Chelsea with the
proliferation of sex shops in Chelsea.
On 8th Avenue. But what he included was a link to a piece in the New York Times from 1963 that warned about homosexuals on the rise in New York City. It was fascinating. I read this piece. I had no idea that this had existed, and Bill Kelly dug it up and sent it around.
That New York Times article was heinous because they quote some father saying, "I tell my teenage son, don't talk to the men coming out of those shops."
Yeah.
And that quote was just left hanging there like, is there a problem with the men coming out of the shops? I mean, you know, what are you talking about? Raising this specter of like people preying on local youth or something like that, which is just non-existent.
Well,
I will say one more thing about William Kelly. He grew up in segregated southeast Missouri, and he said that was a huge influence on his work, seeing that kind of injustice growing up. And he joined the ACLU in high school, immediately became an activist as a young person.
It leaves a big hole in all our lives and activism, and sorely missed by those who knew him well in Chicago.
Okay.
Thank you for all your work, Bill.
Should we do some marriage news?
A few other things
I have
first.
other gay things, yeah.
Okay. Speaking of Chicago, there's a new report out called the Chicago Youth Storage Initiative. It turns out that homeless LGBT teens report that one of their biggest issues is they have no place to put their stuff. Their clothes, their belongings.
Tell me about it.
No, nothing, no place. Say you have a job interview.
Right.
How do you get clean, but how do you keep your clothes somewhere? So they are starting a new program in Chicago called the Youth Storage Initiative, and they're going to provide spaces for kids to leave play.
You know what? The next thing they might want to do is give them homes.
Yeah, that too.
All right. Well, let me tell you something about gay, lesbian, bisexual youth. Gay and bi teens are more likely to get pregnant than their non-gay peers. Did you read this? They're 2 times as more likely to cause a pregnancy, the woman getting pregnant or the boy impregnating a girl. It's a study of 10,000 New York City teens, and we ran into some of this when we worked at Hedrick Martin. Some of them think they're at lower risk for pregnancy because they're gay.
well, gee, where could they have gotten that idea? Perhaps from all the right-wingers who say gay people can't get pregnant. Well, of course they can. They just may not be able to with each other, although we're working on that. But
well, they are getting pregnant with each other, according to this study.
You know what I'm saying, not
Yes.
same-sex pregnancy. But the right wing has for years been putting out this little phrase, gay people can't get pregnant. And that is insanely damaging to these kids.
Sure.
So
I forgot to put this in my list of images. I hope that you have it. It's about the Seton Hall University situation. You have a picture of Father Warren Hall there somewhere. There he is. He's been the campus minister at Seton Hall for a long time. Big sports school. He's very into sports teams and things like that. But he got fired this week for supporting same-sex marriage on Facebook. We have the tweet that he sent out after all this. Which says, I've been fired from Seton Hall University for posting a pic on Facebook supporting LGBT no hate. I'm sorry it was met with this response. I miss my work. I'll miss my work here. Well, the thing is, I didn't realize this, but Seton Hall is actually run by the Archdiocese of Newark, which is a far-right institution even among archdioceses. And
yes, but in the realm of hypocrisy, Seton Hall is currently heavily recruiting a basketball star who is leaving the University of Massachusetts because he wants to transfer. And who is that? Out gay Derek Gordon.
Right. And so
Derek, you think twice before going to Seton Hall.
And campus ministers. I mean, I remember campus ministers from 40 years ago in Catholic schools or at public universities where they had Catholic ministers. They were always basically pro-gay. I mean, how could they not be, seriously, and expect to be,
well, these days they get fired.
Right.
And you had a long discussion with Corey Johnson last week about his athletic career and gay people in sports in general. And there's a new report out called Out in the Fields, which is a report on homophobia in sports, 10,000 people surveyed. Most have seen or fear bad incidents of homophobia in the sports world. And surprise, men in athletics are more closeted than women because they feel they have more to lose.
Speaking of surveys, remember that much heralded survey from December that we talked about in Science magazine that said that having a 20-minute conversation on same-sex marriage and those kinds of issues could really turn people around, and it could also lead to them turning their family members around. We thought this was all very plausible and good, and we heralded it. Well, it's been withdrawn. It was done by a UCLA grad student, Michael LaCour, and he apparently faked the results.
He had no data at all. He just made it all up.
So it's back to the grindstone. We don't know if it's going to take more than 20 minutes, less than 20 minutes. we don't know. We thought 20 minutes, that's all you need.
Yeah, he says, hold on, I'm assembling the data. I want to get it all together.
What happened is,
we're waiting.
It was a very compelling study, so other people actually tried to replicate the results, and they couldn't. It's not funny.
Well, here's something that's semi-funny. A Nebraska court dismissed the lawsuit by the woman who had filed suit asking the court to decide once and for all, are homosexuals living in sin? The court said, this is not a forum for theological debate. Now that is a landmark decision, and I would like to see that attitude adopted by courts around the country. And then from the ridiculous to the even more ridiculous and sad, in California, a dry cleaner ruined a gay man's throw pillow.
All right,
whatever.
Things happen.
So the guy asked for restitution, and the cleaner said no. God knows why. And so the guy went to small claims court to register his claim for restitution, and the court ordered restitution. So the guy receives a check from the dry cleaner made out to so-and-so the buggerer. He goes to court and says, I have to cash a check saying my name, the buggerer. And the court said, no, you do not. So the cleaner then sends him a money order made out to his name, Sodomite.
Well, or if it was Oscar Wilde, it would have said Somdomite.
Ugh.
Oh, well. Don't go back to that dry cleaner.
Yeah, in Midland, Michigan, there's one in a long line of anti-gay pastors and anti-trans. He's married with 5 kids. Well, guess what? He turned up on Grindr, trolling for sex with men. He's now resigned. It's an old story.
Shame on you.
In Georgia, the transgender inmate Ashley Diamond, who had asked to be transferred to a safer facility, she had been kept in a men's prison and attacked repeatedly, and the Department of Corrections had refused, and the court had refused to order her moved. Well, now the Department of Corrections has moved her because she received a sexually explicit and threatening note from another inmate at a religious service. Really, I don't make this stuff up. And congratulations to the New York Times, which has suddenly decided to do endless editorials about transgender issues.
Full-page editorials.
Full-page editorial. This one is Transgender at the CIA. And the editor, Andrew Rosenthal, whose father was a notorious homophobe, says one of the great things about an editorial page is that you can decide to make a big deal out of something, and we decided to make a big deal out of transgender equality. Okay.
Right. That's the issue.
Yep.
Let's talk about the marriage issue, which is coming to a head at the Supreme Court in June.
Okay. And I also want to note Elko, Nevada is having its first Pride Festival parade June 13th.
I'll have to write that down.
Congratulations to you.
Okay.
Marriage news.
So how do you think Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg will vote on same-sex marriage? Well, we have a picture of her.
I don't think there's any question about how she's voting. The question is, has she hinted at how the court is voting?
Well, she performed her 3rd same-sex marriage in the District of Columbia. That's Michael Kahn, the artistic director of the Shakespeare Theatre Company, and Charles Mitchum, an architect from New York, and pronounced them married by the powers vested in her by the Constitution, putting a special emphasis on the word Constitution.
So was she lobbying her fellow justices, or was she hinting that they have made a decision that the Constitution actually supports a right to same-sex marriage?
I would say no one could accuse her of being inscrutable.
Or subtle. But the thinking was that after the oral arguments a couple of weeks ago, they then had their conference meeting where they voted, and that the decision has been made, and that they are in the opinion writing stage. So that's why everyone thinks that her saying powers invested in me by the Constitution was a hint at the final decision.
Not over. And speaking of Supreme Court decisions, last week, for some reason, I referred to the 2000 Supreme Court decision, Boy Scouts of America versus James Dale, that Evan Wolfson argued, right? Am I correct about that?
Yes.
Yes. Where the court allowed discrimination on the basis of sexual orientation to continue by this religious organization, they said. And I said it was a unanimous decision. Well, a viewer corrected me. It was a 5-4 decision. Kennedy and O'Connor voted against us on that one.
That's quite a difference.
Yeah. But
thank you for correcting yourself.
Thank you for the correction, and I'll try to keep it in my head. Anyway.
New poll from the Gallup organization, which is believed to err on the side of sort of conservative results, says 60% of the United States population now supports same-sex marriage, and that is up 5 points in just a year.
And another poll found that a plurality of religious Americans support same-sex marriage. 47% versus 45% opposed. This is the American Values Atlas. Includes 60% support from Catholics, which is up 25% since 2003. Even white evangelicals' support has doubled, more than doubled, from 12 to 28%, and among 18 to 29-year-old evangelicals, white evangelicals, it's 45%.
Okay. And thank you to our New York Senator, Kirsten Gillibrand, who is introducing a national bill to outlaw sexual orientation or gender identity discrimination in adoption decisions.
In Guam, there's been some movement in the same-sex marriage case. There's a lawsuit down there. The governor says he will abide by the court's decision. The attorney general, who supports us, says this constitutes non-opposition and will move for summary judgment in the case. And in case you were wondering, when we were trying to wonder what the fifth territory that we couldn't name on last week's show was, our friend Shep Wanan told us it is the Northern Marianas.
Okay. I think you did a good job of coming up with 4 out of 5.
Yeah.
All right, let's hopscotch some news. As attention was on Cuba for doing that same-sex partnership ceremony and celebrating the International Day Against Homophobia and Transphobia, a transgender woman was stoned to death by a gang of kids, Yosvani Munoz Robena. Sad story.
Can we just do a couple of other marriage notes? In Wisconsin, Lambda Legal is fighting a policy that allows opposite gender parents, but not same gender parents, to be listed on birth certificates. And in Oregon, the Court of Appeals there denied parental rights to a woman who helped raise the biological mother's child, said they did not have a legal relationship even though they had been registered as domestic partners. And that is... And
I think that is a legal relationship.
Well, but the court said no in terms of parental rights.
Okay.
That's what they said. And then that film about Richard and Tony, the binational couple who married in 1975, Limited Partnership, is going to be airing on PBS in June, Monday, June 15th, 10 p.m. Eastern.
Okay.
More international news.
In South Korea, the International Gay and Lesbian Human Rights Commission has gotten the South Korean government to stop allowing conversion therapy in government buildings. A step forward.
Now, in Northern Ireland, a bakery was fined for discrimination for refusing to do a cake that said, "Support gay marriage." In this country, I think you have a First Amendment right not to print messages that you don't want to print. I don't think that would hold up in the United States, even though we say if you make a wedding cake for straights, you got to make wedding cakes for gays. But this is different because it's a message. But in Northern Ireland, they treat free speech differently, and I think it's a bad decision, and I think it could hurt with the Irish referendum, which is in the Republic of Ireland, on same-sex marriage,
which is coming up this Friday. May already have happened by the time you see this show.
And the famous TV journalist Ursula Halligan, we have a picture of her, came out. She was inspired by the upcoming referendum that tends to happen in these crises. And she says, as a person of faith and a Catholic, I believe a yes vote is the most Christian thing to do.
It will, and she's just coming out at age 54.
Yeah, and 25% they estimate that 25% of Catholic priests are going to vote for this thing, based on private surveys.
It will not surprise you to know that the National Organization for Marriage from here is involved in funding the No campaign on same-sex marriage in Ireland. They are also involved in something called a National Family Conference coming up in Kenya. They keep denying, all these right-wingers keep denying that they are involved in fighting us around the world, but in fact that is what they're doing, right, in part because they're losing here. Finishing up on marriage, we have a picture of the Prime Minister of Luxembourg, the out Prime Minister there, who went ahead with his wedding, Xavier Bettel, 42, marrying Gauthier Destanet, a Belgian architect. They just legalized same-sex marriage there this year, and it's considered a conservative Roman Catholic ceremony. And it was a private ceremony, but they had pictures outside of them. And Bettel said, if you want to be honest in politics, you have to be honest with yourself and to accept that you are what you are. Sounds like the beginning of a song. And in France, where they split religious and civil marriages, you have to have a civil marriage, but you can also have a religious one. The United Protestant Church there, which is not the dominant religious organization, but is substantial, has voted to allow their ministers to conduct same-sex wedding blessings. In Bogota, Colombia, a male couple who were married in Spain, one of them is from Spain, one of them is from Colombia, went to Colombia, moved to Colombia, tried to register their marriage there and were rejected. Now, in 2011, the Constitutional Court in Colombia had ordered the legislature to legalize same-sex relationships. And
We're not doing it.
They just have failed to act.
We're not doing it.
But the Interior Minister has now promised to put forward some kind of marriage rights.
In Chile, 50,000 marched in the annual March for Equality, and they urged passage of a gender identity bill. Civil unions there were signed last month, and gay marriage legislation is under consideration.
This is all in connection with the celebration of the International Day Against Homophobia and Transphobia. In Moscow, a flash mob went to the center of town to try to release rainbow balloons in celebration. 17 of those people got arrested.
And in Russia, the parliament moved legislation to let prosecutors declare foreign and international organizations undesirable and shut them down. And of course, this is partly aimed at gay groups. Sounds like a great place to do business.
In Scotland, the Church of Scotland will ordain partnered gay clergy. That is controversial and a big step forward.
And this is the biggest church there, the Scots Kirk.
Yeah. You know those traffic lights you talked about in Vienna last week? They were going to be just a temporary thing. They're going to keep them because they're very popular with pictures of same-sex couples on the walk and don't walk lights.
Now, we had the International Day Against Homophobia and Transphobia May 17th, and President Obama issued a statement about it, saying there's much more to do and throughout the country and worldwide. And that ought to include a couple of places in Africa, which they are commenting on. We told you what happened in the Gambia, where President Jama said he wants to slit our throats. Well, Human Rights Campaign, RFK Human Rights, got on this, calling on Obama to condemn it, and they did. Susan Rice issued a statement saying it was unconscionable, along with the alarming deterioration of broader human rights in the Gambia.
And there's a new report from the International Lesbian and Gay Association which points out that homosexuality is legal in 117 countries around the world, but illegal in 76 countries.
Right.
Most don't act on the laws, but 5 or 6 of them actually perform the death penalty. They have information in this report on marriage laws, non-discrimination laws, hate crimes, adoption. So go to ilga.org for this report on laws around the world.
In Nigeria, 21 young men were arrested for being in a, quote, gay cult. They had 122 condoms between them, it says. The police accused them of holding an initiation ceremony into their evil cult. The men were physically assaulted by the police, photographed in their underwear. The International Center for Reproductive Health and Sexual Rights posted their bail, which was only about $25 in some cases, but a lot of money for these folks, but they got them out.
In Cyprus, the cabinet has approved civil partnerships for same-sex couples, although leaving out joint adoption rights, but the parliament now has to approve it.
In Australia, same-sex marriage is only a handful of votes, apparently, from passing the parliament now. Former Deputy Prime Minister Wayne Swan switched to yes, saying he'd been wrong to oppose it.
And in London, a court has decided a case. 2 gay men hired a surrogate to carry a baby for them. She then wanted to keep the baby, and the court said no. It's the gay men's baby, and they get to keep it.
And did you see this special on Vice on Uganda on HBO?
Yes.
Wow. Featured a lesbian who was gang raped by men who said they would make her a real woman. She bore a child from that rape. A man in the piece says that he has raped 100 women who are lesbian, and a U.S. Christian groups that put on anti-gay skits there as part of their evangelism.
A terrible story from Argentina where a judge has ruled that a convicted child abuser who is convicted for having sex with a 6-year-old victim, 6 years, can have his sentence reduced from 6 years to 38 months because the child had been abused before. And therefore, this attack did not have a grave effect on the child. Unspeakable.
Unbelievable.
The Boston Gay Men's Chorus is going to be the first, they say, to tour the Middle East in June. They're going to Istanbul and Israel. And we actually have a very heartening story from Vietnam of, you know, I'm old enough that any news out of Vietnam at all is stunning to me. And the fact of an active gay community in Vietnam is really thrilling and amazing. So there's a feature story from Vietnam television about what the gay community is doing there these days, and we thought you would like to see this.
Communist Vietnam has become an unusual leader for gay rights in Southeast Asia this year. Lawmakers lifted a ban on same-sex marriage in a new law that took effect on New Year's Day. The move was surprising even for activists in Vietnam who've seen the movement for the rights of LGBT, or lesbian, gay, bisexual and transgender, gain ground in recent years. Tan Chiu-yi reports from Hanoi.
From Hanoi, two young men are heading to the far-flung corners of Vietnam on motorbike to find gay, lesbian, bisexual and transgender people. Their quest? To prove LGBT is not just a city concept.
I usually say that every LGBT are everywhere and they can be anyone, but somehow I don't have the evidence to show that.
They're planning a book and documentary at the end of the road trip. It was Hui's idea. He's a gay activist. Nam, on the other hand, is straight and calls himself an LGBT ally.
Straight men always say that they are strong, you know, and they were supposed to protect the weak, right?
Nam and Hui are part of a young, educated and growing number of city dwellers who are pushing the envelope of what conservative Vietnam's willing to accept. Activists say the LGBT movement has come out of the closet in recent years. In late 2014, lawmakers made history, repealing a law banning same-sex marriage. The new law doesn't recognize nor protect same-sex couples, but the move is widely seen as an official and surprising nod to the LGBT community.
Only 5 years ago, I think none of us think about working with the law, changing the law. I think we already discussed about stigma and discrimination.
Dr. Du Ang's organization is one of several NGOs behind the Cabinet, an exhibition on the hidden lives, loves and struggles of LGBT people in Vietnam. It's another sign of changing times when old family secrets get told in a public setting.
This may not be a huge exhibition by international standards, but it was a labor of love 5 years in the making. Organizers had the idea for an exhibition as early as 2010, but had problems getting a partner or getting sufficient funding. Even now, no museum in Hanoi could or would host the exhibition, until the University of Fine Arts agreed.
A number of exhibits had to be taken down days before the opening, however. Organizers said the pressure came from different sources. These stories that cannot be told point to censorship and restriction for rights groups that fight for diversity and tolerance.
I think in Vietnam, it's not because you are homosexual, but if you're different, if you are disabled, right? You make discrimination.
Recent inroads by LGBT groups into the country's social consciousness is widely seen as a collective success for Vietnam's civil society as a whole.
The example of LGBT movement show that if different social groups really have a serious agenda, know how to work with the government, how to mobilize support from society, then their voice will be heard and their agenda will be taken seriously.
In a political system where rules are not clear and change often, it's uncertain how many more can follow their lead. Tan Chiu-yi, Channel News Asia, Hanoi.
Fascinating.
Yes, great progress.
Absolutely.
Great progress. AIDS news.
Yep.
The big news this week, and we have a picture of him, Michael Johnson, young man in Missouri, who
23 years old,
who is going to be sentenced to from 30 to 65 years. He was convicted of recklessly infecting a partner with HIV and exposing others. The law there in Missouri says if you have HIV, whether or not you are undetectable, whether you use condoms, whatever if you just jerk off together, you must disclose your status beforehand or you are committing a crime.
And the DA, when picking a jury, got up and asked all these horrible, racist, homophobic questions about how do you feel about interracial sex? How do you feel about
almost everybody thinks gayness is a sin, according to that jury.
Yeah,
so anyway, the problem with this kind of stuff is it drives people away from testing.
Yes.
If you don't know your status, you can't be convicted of a crime like this.
But the idea of putting all of this in the context of the criminal justice system, we do not prosecute people for transmitting HPV, which causes cancer, and at this point is probably more deadly than HIV in many cases. We have singled out, talk about American exceptionalism. We have HIV exceptionalism.
I mean, first of all, and as we always used to say to the kids at Hetrick Martin when we were teaching them about AIDS, there are people out there who will not tell you that they have this virus, even though they know this virus. You can protect yourself.
Or they may not know.
Right.
In either case, your responsibility.
You need to protect yourself.
Yes.
I mean,
it's the only sure way.
Yeah. The public defender, he had a public defender. She said, it takes two to have sex. The sentencing is in July.
And there's another case in San Diego where Thomas Miguel Guerra was convicted of infecting a former boyfriend. He claimed he informed him earlier, but pleaded no contest to the charges. He wound up with just 180 days in jail because the laws are a little different in California. And there was some question of whether there was any proof that he intended to infect him. The cases are different, but again, it's all about putting this in the criminal justice system, which is absolutely where it should not be. Right. People have the ability to protect themselves in most cases. There is also forced sexual contact, but and that should certainly be prosecuted for that alone. But it's just horrible that this continues to happen.
The AIDS Walk was in New York this weekend, and the reason I mention it is because, it turns out 30,000 people, and
I was there.
I went to Central Park, yes, myself, and to see these people streaming by from all the different communities all over the place is very, very moving. They raised about $5 million for GMHC and other AIDS charities.
Yes, and I was out there with my little Queer Nation friends flyering in support of a comprehensive civil rights bill, which will be introduced in some form in June, and we're hearing some very positive rumors about it, which I can't even share with Andy.
I didn't have this on the list, but do you have the picture of Larry Kramer there? I can talk about it anyway. He got an honorary degree from Yale this past weekend, and he called it the most moving day of his life. He sat there recalling that 100 yards away he tried to kill himself as a student there in the 1950s, and we're glad that you didn't.
And soon HBO will be running its documentary about Larry by Jean Carla Musto. We'll let you know exactly when that's coming up. In New York, New York State and the Hospital Association and Lambda Legal Defense are getting together to train hospitals on the law around treating trans people and best practices. So that's a good step forward. And the health insurance company that you talked about last week, Assurant Health, which had said it would not cover Truvada as PrEP, has reversed its decision under heavy attack and will cover Truvada as PrEP.
On the medical marijuana front, New Jersey now has 3 dispensaries, and they're applying to open one in New York. Now, New York has a medical marijuana bill, but says you can't give it in a smokable form.
It's terrible.
So Dick Gottfried, our Assembly member, who's head of the Health Committee in the Assembly, wants to vastly expand that to 20 dispensaries and enable patients to smoke it. Governor Cuomo opposes these changes.
Really? Wait till Sandy Lee, his companion, just having had a double mastectomy, wants to smoke a little pot for pain relief.
I thought of bringing that up. Maybe when it hits home,
exactly.
He will do something about it.
Isn't that what changes people's minds? Not a 20-minute conversation?
Yes.
Entertainment news. Well, actually, I have to tell you the headline, which you probably are oblivious to, is the Keeping Up with the Kardashians two-part special on Bruce Jenner talking to the family about his transition. Recorded before his interview with Diane Sawyer.
How was it?
Sitting down with all the girls, sitting down with Kris Jenner. It was interesting. What's interesting is that it's a classic case where they're still just getting the news and getting used to this, and he's a mile ahead because he's been wanting to do this for 55 years. He's finally giving himself permission, and he is so happy and excited and ready to burst out, and they're holding him back, and he's having to sit there and say, yes, I know it's tough for you, but really it's okay. No, I'm not dying. No, you don't have to mourn me. I'm still here.
I'm still a Republican.
It is a
Not me.
classic
Him.
family dynamic.
Her. Well,
Yeah.
what are we saying now?
And there will be more. What do you mean? What are we saying?
Him, her.
It's still him.
Still him.
Yep.
And Cate Blanchett is still heterosexual. She was in Cannes for her lesbian-themed movie Carol. We got a picture there with Rooney Mara there on the left, and the director
Plays her lover in the
Todd
movie.
Haynes. She plays a socialite who has an affair with a shop girl, Rooney, and. But last week she said she was asked about having relations with women, and she said, "Oh yes, many." But that apparently was a truncated piece of the interview where she said, "But they weren't sexual." She apparently said, and she said the answer to that is no.
Yeah, well, the reporter says she was accurately quoted, so now it's a he said, she said situation.
All right. But she also said, and this is good, she said it shouldn't matter in 2015. And she said in all these countries, homosexuality is illegal. Now, she also said that the love scenes in Carol, nude, made her apprehensive. But she said no more so than when I'm doing it with a guy. December release for that film.
On The Bold and the Beautiful, soap on CBS, Maya is coming out as transgender on the show. That was anticipated.
And I was highly anticipating a play called Tuesdays at Tesco's at 59 East 59th as part of the Brits Off-Broadway thing, because it starred one of my favorite actors there. He is Simon Callow, who's very famous for Shakespeare and Dickens. So here he's taking on the role of a transgender woman in working-class England and the role of her father. He plays both roles and does the voices and things. And it's a very worthy subject, and he does the father very well. But the daughter, Pauline, is much less convincing, I have to say. And nothing much happens in the play until there's a very big shock ending, which I won't give away if you want to go down there to 59.
Did you see Queen Latifah's Bessie?
I started to watch it, and it wasn't very. I didn't find it very
flat.
Directed by
Dee Reese, who we've had here, who did Pariah, who Queen Latifah clearly hired because she liked Pariah.
Maybe she liked. Well, all right.
Queen Latifah is a lesbian, but she was, and the scenes, I would say, of affection with women in the movie were pretty good.
Right up front.
But she was asked about her relationships with women in doing press for the movie, and she said, I don't talk about my private life. Please,
I mean, it's just so insulting to us.
Au contraire, Fun Home I saw again on Broadway.
Best show on Broadway.
Absolutely fantastic. So moving. I was almost crying by the end. It was really,
cried quite a bit.
Really amazing. You must see Fun Home.
It's also fun.
Funny, moving, and going to win a lot of Tonys on June 7th.
We
Go
hope.
see it, and we will see you next week.
Take care.